All right, so what we are doing in this course is applying laws of physics to biology. Okay? Now, both physicists and biologists are scientists. So, I mean, they believe in the same theory of science. They look at science, in the same way. But when biologists study a system, okay, they study irreducibly complex systems. What that means is the systems they study, they cannot be simplified. They have to study the system as a whole. Whereas when a physicist studies a system, they simplify it as much as possible. Okay? And when they discover laws, what do those laws apply to? When a physicist discovers a law.
A living being.
I'm sorry?
A living being.
It applies to everything, living and non-living things. Okay, so they simplify things, and the laws apply to everything. Physicists express their laws as mathematical equations. Okay, and so they focus on broad principles. Okay, so while in biology, systems often cannot be simplified without throwing away out details that are essential to the biological functions. Yeah. So anyway, so physics is the most quantitative of all sciences. The laws of physics are stated as mathematical equations. So let me give you an example for that. Okay. So Mr. Newton gave us the law of gravity. What does the law of gravity say? Every object in the universe attracts every other object in the universe. Okay? So for instance, this object attracts this object. Okay, let's say this object attracts this object with a force of 10 pounds. What does this guy do to him? He attracts him with a force of 10 pounds. Okay? So action and reaction are equal and opposite. Okay? Mr. Newton, he gave us the formula for this force, the magnitude of this force. Now again, you don't have to remember any of this stuff. Okay? So Newton gave us G is the universal gravitational constant. M1 is the mass of M1 and M2 are the masses of the two objects divided by R squared. Okay? So here is Newton's law of gravity. Okay? So here's a law that is stated in mathematical form. Okay? So the laws of physics are stated as mathematical equations. Okay? Now physics has given us many things. It's given us the technology to make images like these. These are HIV viruses and so on. It has given scanning electron microscopes, okay, and so on. It's told us how radiation therapy works, and all those are a result of the study of physics. Okay. Now lately there has been use of mathematics in biology as well. So here are some examples. Mathematical model of enzyme kinematics provide quantitative prediction of complex biochemical pathways. So people are starting to use mathematics and physics in biology as well. Okay? Neural network models. We mentioned this again. Do you guys know where is the most powerful computer in the world?
Sweden.
I'm sorry?
Sweden, right?
There's one attached to your shoulder. Okay? There's one attached to every shoulder. That's the most powerful computer in the world. Okay?
The brain.
The brain, yeah.
Wow. I understood that.
I'm sorry?
I understood that.
Yeah. So, and we don't understand how it works. Okay? So here's a neuron. It gets signals from other neurons, and then it sends out signals to other neurons. Okay, so here is a neural network. This node models a neuron. Okay, you're getting input. For instance, you're listening to this lecture. Okay, this talks to many other neurons, and then you come to a conclusion. Okay? So, and they use neural networks for your chat GPT and stuff like that. Okay? So neural network models improve our understanding of both the real brain and artificial intelligence. Okay? So we are starting to use mathematics and biology. Okay? Epidemiological models increase our knowledge of how disease is spread. Okay? So you write down differential equations on how disease is spread, okay, and so on. Okay, so if a disease is airborne and you're living in a desert by yourself, will that disease spread? No. It's airborne and you sneeze and your water droplets travel 10 feet, you're in this room, everybody will get sick. You sneeze 20 times, everybody will get sick. Okay? So it'll depend on what is the coupling between in the spreading, okay, between carriers. All right, diffusion. We want to study this and understand this. Who uses diffusion in the biological system, in the biological world? Who uses diffusion? I'm sorry? Everyone. So when you have to transport stuff at the cellular level, okay, diffusion is the process. Okay. Inside a cell, if you want to transport stuff, diffusion is the process. So the last mile transport is diffusion. Okay. So think of this as when the Amazon guy comes, brings stuff to your house. To get from the truck to your house, he's got to walk. That's diffusion. Okay. I'm just using an analogy. Okay. So whenever you have to transport stuff, the distance of a cell between cells, diffusion is the process. Okay. So let's now understand diffusion. So here's a simple model. Now, diffusion happens through semi-permeable membranes. What do semi-permeable membranes mean? Yep.
Something's gonna go through it, something's gonna.
That's right. I guess, like the name suggests, in science we name everything very logically most of the time. Well, almost all of the time. Okay. So some things can get through, and some other things cannot. All right. So now and diffusion, what happens in diffusion? Diffusion is a random thermal process. Okay. Now when I make this membrane semi-permeable, there's a higher concentration of this, and these molecules will move from a region of higher concentration to lower concentration. Okay. The amount of blue molecules that will move to the right side, how could I increase that? What could I do to increase that? You could make them go faster. You could increase the temperature. What else can I do to increase the flow?
Increase the concentration?
Very good. So those are the two things. Okay. So the flow rate depends on the concentration difference, and it will depend on the temperature as well. Okay. All right. So here I made it semi-permeable, and you see blue molecules will move from right to left, okay, or left to right, and red molecules will move from right to left. Okay. And this is the process that happens where all of the transport phenomena happens the last mile, or between cells, inside cells. At cellular level, this is how transport happens. From your alveoli to your capillaries, from your capillaries to the interstitial fluid, and the transport of oxygen, the transport of nutrients, all happens like this. Okay? So this is a very important process. And it depends on the concentration difference and so on. Okay? So let's look at some more details, okay, of this process. So diffusion is the process by which particles spread out from a region of higher concentration to lower concentration due to random thermal motion. It's the most important process in biology. Diffuses from your lungs to your blood. Neurotransmitters diffuse across synapses, and so on. Diffusion is the process employed when molecules are transported small distances, roughly the size of a cell. Okay. Diffusion would take too long for transport across 10 centimeters. Yeah. I'll give you numbers on that in a second. Okay. But if you had to transport something the distance of your fist, that would take too long. That would take almost a week, okay, in water. So, you guys understand the following. Yes, yep.
What sort of molecule is diffused when your synapses fire?
The neurotransmitter molecules, I forget the names. Anybody have had anatomy and physiology? What are they called?
ACH.
Huh?
CH01.
Okay, let's look it up. Okay, acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter. Okay, so that's one of the molecules. And later on, we'll talk about numbers and stuff like that. So, all right, so here's the example. So if you're a cell, okay, so for instance, this is a lake, and if you're a paramecium, or you're a single-celled animal, then you can get if you want to get rid of the bad molecules, all you have to do is use diffusion. You want oxygen, all you have to do is you just have to swim around and oxygen diffuses. Okay. So if you're a single-celled animal, that's all you need. Diffusion is all you need. Okay. Food concentration, you just have to go to a region where the nutrient concentration is higher outside than inside, and it'll diffuse in. Okay. Toxins, your toxins are always, you're producing toxins constantly. They're at a higher concentration inside than outside, and they'll diffuse out. Okay. But what happens if you decide to become a mouse? You breathe in air into your lungs. Okay. And now how do you get this oxygen to there? How do you do that? I'm sorry? So, soon as you become big, now you have to buy a truck. You have to have a transport system to bring those molecules close to the point of delivery, to the cells. And then you could use diffusion. Okay, so the diffusion is always the last step. So as soon as you become big, you got to have complicated systems. You got to have plumbing, okay, to transport stuff. All right.
Diffusion would be one of the first steps as well, right?
I'm sorry?
The diffusion would be one of the first, like, second step, breathe in air and diffuses the oxygen.
Yeah. So the point is, if you're going to walk, you're going to go small distances. You want to go large distances, you got to buy a car. That's the point. Okay. All right. So you walk from your home to into your car, then you take your car to Jacksonville, and then you walk the last distance. Okay. All right. So again, what I want you to understand is diffusion is diffusion is a process you employ when molecules are transported. Okay, so molecules are transported small distances. Here's oxygen getting into the bloodstream, carbon dioxide getting there. Okay. So here's a picture of a diffusion. This is some sort of a dye in a gel, and you insert this dye, and you can see that the dye has diffused. And this is a test tube roughly the size of your hand, and this took almost a week. So this was picture taken today, and this was a week later. Okay? And so you see, it illustrates diffusion takes a long time. Okay? Now you saw that in this simulation. Okay. So this is random thermal motion. Okay. Now between collisions, a molecule travels in straight lines. Okay. And then after collision, it'll go in a random direction. Okay. So a molecule is equally likely to go right or left. So how come molecules diffuse to the right? How come the blue molecules diffuse to the right? Be-
The blue ones were the ones with the less concentration, yes? Or was it the red ones?
Okay, so what would have happened is, let's say if the blue molecules were in the center, they would have diffused equally in all directions, okay? Which is what happened in the test tube. Here, in this case, we had a wall here and we were blocking the diffusion on the right, left, okay? And so they diffused to the right, okay? All right, so you saw that there are lots of short, straight segments of random length in random direction. If you followed each molecule, between collisions, they go in straight paths, and then after a collision, they'll go in random directions. Okay? So we'll define something called the diffusion coefficient, denoted by D, in this formula. V is the average speed of these molecules. Okay? So for instance, the average speed of air molecules in this room is about 300 meters per second. 300 to 500 meters per second, which is an air molecule in this room will go from here to Mainland High School in 1 second. Okay? That's the average speed of the water molecule in this glass of coffee. Okay? So why is that relevant? Why is that relevant? Because the diffusion in our body happens in water. Okay? Yeah. So that's the speed we're talking about. What is D, you think? D is the average distance you go between collisions. Okay? In water, all the molecules are very closely packed. Okay? So you don't travel very far before you collide. In air, you travel a lot more distance before you collide. Okay? So for instance, if I take okay, so here's an example to illustrate this. So let's say we are swimming underwater. I take a perfume and spritz some perfume. If you were far away, would you smell the perfume? No. Now if I spritz the perfume in this room, the molecules can travel much further, and so eventually you smell it. So it's not a clean example, but it illustrates the point. Okay. All right, so that's the average distance between collisions. That's the diffusion coefficient. Okay. What this tells you is, so what we are interested in is the following. We are interested in knowing how far molecules travel, can diffuse, and how long does it take for them to diffuse. Okay? So that's what we're interested in. Okay, so we'll apply this to our situation. Okay, so here's the average distance. So R is the distance it'll travel. So if the molecules were here, on the average, how far would they travel? R is the distance from their location. RMS means root mean square. Anyway, all right, so this is the average distance they would travel, and that's equal to square root of 6 times the diffusion constant times the time. And this is in 3 dimensions. So let's say here, this was a pool. We were inside a pool, and I explode a ink bomb here. And the question is, how does this ink spread? And that's what this formula will be. All right, so now we'll apply this to real life situations. Okay. So you guys understand, in gases, the average distance D would be much larger. In gases, would be much larger than in liquids. Okay. All right, so if you take a glass of water, liquids, unlike gases, are essentially incompressible. What does that mean?
They cannot be compressed.
Yeah, so you cannot increase their density much. Okay? They're incompressible. So there's not space between molecules. Essentially, all the molecules are touching each other in a liquid. Okay? The distance a molecule can move between collisions is at most the diameter of a molecule or less. Okay? So, and they can move about 0.1 nanometer, about half a nanometer, no, 0.05 nanometers, essentially. So in a water molecule, so in this glass of water, each water molecule will move about that distance before it collides with another water molecule. That's what that means. Okay? The speed of the water molecule is about 300 meters per second. Okay? And like we said, if you increase the temperature, that speed would increase and the rate of diffusion would increase. Okay? So the diffusion constant for a molecule in water is this 1/2 the speed of the molecule. So this could be an ATP molecule, this could be an oxygen molecule in water, okay? Times the average distance. There's the diffusion constant. All right, why do we need this number? So we're going to do some calculations here. And again, you just have to remember the sort of the ballpark numbers. Okay, so now let's estimate how long it takes small molecules such as oxygen to diffuse 10 micrometers. A micro is a millionth of a meter, 10 micrometer, about the diameter of a cell. So what we're going to calculate is, if this is a cell, how long does it take for the oxygen molecule to get across the cell? Okay. All right. Through water, we're going to calculate oxygen molecule diffusing through water. But you know, your cells are essentially water, your body is essentially water. Okay, so that gives you, okay. So the root mean square distance is that, okay. So if you rearrange this, what you're trying to calculate is the time. You square those things, and time is root mean square distance squared divided by 6d. D is the diffusion constant, okay. So there's 10 micrometer is 10 times 10 to the minus 6 meters. Again, 10 to the minus 5 meters. So there's the distance, okay, the size of a cell. And you put in these numbers, there's the diffusion constant that we had calculated here. And you get 2 milliseconds. Okay? So at those distances, the diffusion is fast. So, for instance, how long does it take for oxygen to diffuse from your alveoli to your capillaries? About a few milliseconds. Okay? Oxygen will go across there, across the cell in a few milliseconds. So what happens is, so oxygen diffuses into these capillaries, and then it's transported throughout your body. And here's the capillary near your cells. And via diffusion, oxygen will come into the intercellular fluid, okay, and then diffuse into the cells. Okay? And all this takes a few milliseconds. All right. So if you have to transport it small distances, that's the time it takes. Okay? Now, if you calculate the same thing, if you wanted to transport something 10 centimeters, like I said, is roughly the size of your fist, a little more than that. Okay? If you had to transport some stuff, if you had to transport molecules distances of 10 centimeters, okay, there's 10 centimeters, it would take 2 days to diffuse in water. Okay? So for oxygen to diffuse 4 inches in water would take 2 days. Okay? And so if you, soon as you become a big animal, you have to have plumbing. Okay? All right. All right, so here is a synaptic gap. This is the gap between two neurons. Okay, so the tip of an axon connecting to a tip of a dendrite. Okay, so this is the synaptic cleft, and the gap is about 20 nanometers. Okay, a nanometer is a tenth of a nanometer is the size of an atom. So this is about 200 atoms thick, the gap. Okay, and so when when they communicate, this guy will release neurotransmitters, and these neurotransmitters travel across the gap and bind to receptors there, and that's how they talk. Okay. Now the question is, how long does it take for these neurotransmitters to cross this gap? It takes a microsecond, okay, because the distance is small enough that it happens very fast. Okay. You will learn, so it takes a microseconds. You learn nerve impulses travel in your hand, in your body, along the nerve, roughly about 100 meters a second. Okay. So nerve impulses travel 100 meters is from here to the student center. Okay. So that's how fast the nerve impulses travel. And across the synaptic gap, it just takes a microsecond. Okay, so that's not the bottleneck. All right, now we'll study scaling laws. Okay, what we want to study is the following. Okay, so this guy is an Etruscan shrew. Okay, and let me show you the actual size of this guy. Okay, there he is. Okay, he's a tiny little fellow. He weighs about 2 grams. Okay. Now, what we want to answer is the following. Can we just make him bigger and get a new animal? So can we make him 10 times bigger in every direction? And will that be a new animal? That's the question we want to answer. Okay? So, for instance, here's a question we are answering. This is the shrew, and this is an elephant. What we have done is we have increased the size of the shrew by 175 in every direction, and you see it's become the same size as the elephant. Do you see any problems there in those two pictures? I'm sorry? Right. See, the legs are too skinny. Okay? And so that's the kind of stuff we want to understand. So let's do that now. Okay? So we'll see how you have to, what we'll learn is how you have to increase certain body parts more than other body parts. Okay? You might have to do that. Okay? So for instance, the legs have to be increased more than 107 by a factor of more than 175. Okay. So, all right. So now we'll do a little. I'm sorry.
Blank paper.
All right. So here's a basketball. Yeah. Now, the surface area of a basketball is given by this formula. A is 4 pi r squared. And the volume of the basketball is given by 4 pi by 3 r cubed. Okay. Now, the surface area, so if I increase the r is the radius of the basketball, okay. Now, if I triple the size of the basketball, if I increase the radius by a factor of 3, how much would the area increase?
3 times.
So 3, if I would increase the radius by 3, 3 squared. 9. It would increase by a factor of 9, right? Everybody understand that? All right. How much would its volume increase? 3 times R. 3 cubed is 27 times. Its volume would increase 27 times. Everybody understand that? Okay. So we're going to use this now. So instead of a basketball, now let's say this is an animal. Okay, we'll take a spherical animal. Let's say it's an animal. Now we increase the size of the animal by a factor of 10. Okay? The volume would increase by a factor of what? 10 cubed, it would increase by a factor of 1,000. Okay? All right. Now let's give this animal legs. Okay. By the way, so the mass of an animal is density times volume. Okay, so if the volume increases by all animals are what? Water. Okay. The density of water is the same. You increase the volume by a factor of 1,000. The mass increases by a factor of 1,000. Okay. So now you become 1,000 times heavier. Your legs have to support that. Your legs have to become how much? 1,000 times stronger. Okay. You guys following this argument? Okay. So the strength of a leg depends on the area of cross section. The area of cross section is circular, is pi r squared. When you made the animal 10 times bigger, the area, if you increase all dimensions by a factor of 10, the area only increased by a factor of 100. But now you have to support a weight 1,000 times greater. Okay? So your legs cannot just increase by a factor of 10. They have to increase by a factor of, the radius has to increase by a factor of r to the power of 3/2. Okay? So it has to increase by a factor of 10 to the power of 3/2. And 10 to the power of 3/2, in our example, you can do the calculation. Okay, 32 times by a factor of 32. Okay? So what we are saying is, because you had to support more weight, your legs couldn't just become 10 times bigger. They had to become 32 times bigger. Okay? And that was what was happening here. Okay? In this case, the elephant was 175 times bigger than the shrew. Okay? And instead of so instead of the leg becoming 100, when you went from the shrew to the elephant, you increased by a size of 175. You just couldn't make the legs 175 times thicker. You have to make the legs 2,300 times thicker. Okay? So those are scaling laws. So we want to study how the dimensions of various things have to change when you make a bigger animal. Okay. Did you guys understand that? Okay. All right. So you guys can, the proportionality, this is the surface area of a sphere, you increase the size of the sphere by a factor of 3, the area would increase by a factor of 9, and so on. Okay. So we've talked about all of that. Okay. When scaling up an animal by a factor of L, the radii of the bone cross-section must increase by a factor of L to the power 3/2, okay? Because the bones are supporting greater weights. So we'll study allometry now, okay? So let me define this first for you guys. The study of scaling laws in biology is called allometry. So we saw an example. It is the study of how physiological processes scale with body size. Okay. So you make a, you guys might know this. When you make an animal bigger, a bigger animal, what happens to the heart rate? What's your heart rate compared to a mouse's heart rate? Is it larger or smaller? I'm sorry? As you make an animal bigger, the heart rate goes down. Okay?
I know you said the size of the heart. I thought you was talking about the size of the heart.
Oh, no. I was talking heart rate.
Okay.
It's no big deal. All right, so we want to know that as an animal gets bigger, does it live longer or shorter?
Longer.
Longer. I mean, that's a simple example. You live longer than a mouse. Yeah. So on. So we want to study that kind of stuff. Okay. So heart rate, respiration, lifespan, blood vessel diameter, or any number of other physiological features depend on mass. How are they related to the mass of an animal? Okay, that's what we want to study. Yeah. It turns out that a lot of these quantities, a lot of physiological quantities like heart rate and so on, will depend on the mass, like so. This is a constant. It will depend on the mass, like so. A power of 1/4 times n. Okay, and integer multiple times the power of 1/4. It could be positive or negative. Okay, so we'll study that. Okay, heart rate, lifespan, and so on. Okay, again. All right, so that is what allometry is about. Okay, here what we're going to do is, see, this is basal metabolic rate plotted as a function of mass of the animal. Okay, and these are for various animals. This is the Etruscan shrew, and there's the blue whale. Now I want to point something out here. This is what is called a log graph. You see, you're plotting powers of 10. This is 10, that's 100, that's 1,000. Okay, it's the power that is equally spaced. Here's 10 grams, 100 grams, 1,000 grams, and so on. Okay, this is what is called a log graph. Why did we plot that? Why are we doing this? You can see that the shrew is about 2 grams, and the blue whale is about 200 million grams. So on this graph, you have shown animals, I mean, from the lightest to the biggest, a large span of data is shown. Whenever you have to show a large span of data, what you do is you use a log graph. Okay? This fellow is 200 million times heavier than that. Okay? So, okay. Log plot, which a log plot allows for a large range of data points to be displayed. Okay. And you can see that the basal metabolic rate is related to the mass. Clearly, there's a linear relationship. And the slope is 0.76, which is 3/4. The slope is 3/4. Okay. So, log of the basal metabolic rate, log of basal metabolic rate is 3/4 log of, and again, you don't have to know any of this math. I'm just showing you in case you're interested. Log C. This is a constant. Okay. And if you know properties of log, this is 3/4. So log basal metabolic rate is, and I'm doing two steps at the same time, log CM3/4. So this has to equal that. Okay. So basal metabolic rate is a constant times mass to the power of 3/4. And there's, remember we said, a lot of physiological properties. BMR CM 1/4 times 3. Okay, so it's a power of 1/4 times an integer. Okay, anyway, we won't worry about this. So that's how basal metabolic rate is related to the mass of an animal. Okay, you get more massive, your basal metabolic rate has to increase. Okay. All right. So you see that they're related. And the log-log, when you have to plot a large range of data, log-log plot is what you use. Okay. So the basal metabolic rate is a constant times the mass of the animal to the power of 3/4. Okay. So this is a scaling law. Okay. As you scale up the animal, you figure out how physiological property scales. Okay, you found a law, and here's a law that you've expressed mathematically. Okay. This result has a broad generality across all animals. It turns out that even birds and insects have metabolic rates that scale as powers of 3/4. So you take a little sparrow and a big emu, okay, and its metabolic rate will scale like that. Okay. This seems to be a law of biology. Okay. Scaling laws, especially ones that span many orders of magnitude, tell us that there's some underlying regularity in the physics of the organism. Okay. So now let's look at some other scaling laws. Here is the heart rate of animals. Again, million-fold increase. So we have a mouse, and whatever animal that is, that's 1,000,000 times heavier than that. So we are plotting a large number of data points. Okay, and again, you see the heart rate goes down as you get more massive. That's what this is showing you. Okay, and it turns out that this law is the heart rate is goes as -1 to the power 4 with mass. Okay, so the heart rate decreases with the mass of the animal. This is the lifespan of an animal with mass. As the mass increases, this is a positive power, the lifespan increases. Okay. So now let me point out something very interesting. So here's the heart rate, which is C1 times the mass of an animal times 1/4. And here's the lifespan of an animal, which is another constant times mass of the animal times 1/4. Okay, so this is the heart rate, and this is the lifespan. Let's multiply these two. The heart rate times the lifespan. What do you think that gives you? C1m to the power of 1/4, C2m to the power of 1/4. M to the power of 1/4 and minus 1/4 plus 1/4 is 0. M to the power of 0 is 1. Okay? So this is equal to C1 times C2. Okay, this is your heart rate. This is your lifespan. And it doesn't depend on the mass. It's the same for all animals. And this works out to, the product of these two constants, I mean, that's experimentally found, is 1.5 times 10 to the power of 9. That's right. So you have about 2 billion heartbeats. You can do whatever you want with it. You have 2 billion heartbeats. A mouse has 2 billion heartbeats. How many does an elephant have?
2 billion?
How many does a blue whale have?
2 billion?
How many does your dog have?
2 billion?
2 billion.
It's just about the rate of how many, like how fast it goes. So ours beats slower
Right.
than a mouse, so we
Right.
live longer.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. So if you measure the lifespan of a mammal in heartbeats, everybody has the same lifespan. Okay.
The heartbeat's about 7 times faster, or 7 times slower than the dog.
Right. So you'll live 7 times longer than a dog. That's where the 7 times come. Yeah. Yeah. All right, so these are scaling laws, okay? So what you have is a physiological property, scaling with mass, and this exponent is an integer times 1/4 power, okay? So small animals have fast heart rates and short lifetimes. Larger animals have slow heart rates but longer lifetimes. Okay, and so when you measure the lifetimes, okay, so I showed you the calculation, and C1 plus C2 is about 1.5 billion heartbeats. Okay. Now, if you divide 1.5 billion divided by your heart rate, 70 beats a minute, it comes out to about 40 years. Okay, that used to be our lifespan, average lifespan 200, 300 years ago. Now we've extended it by, how have we extended our lifespan? I'm sorry? Medical science. We got a lot of Band-Aids, and we keep it ourselves going.
Not as much running from predators.
What's that?
Is it not as much running from predators?
Right. All right. So allometry. A recent theory posits that the organisms, so the question is, so you want to come up with a theory on how do these physiological parameters scale with mass, like as integer multiples of the power of 1/4, okay? So this is what we're trying to explain, okay? So it turns out the quarter power scaling laws are everywhere in biology. A log-log graph of heart rate, respiration, lifespan, blood vessel diameter, or any number of other physiological features versus mass tend to be a straight line with a slope that is an integer multiple of a quarter. Okay? So what we're saying is the diameter of a blood vessel is some constant times m to the power of 1/4 times some integer, okay, and so on. Okay, so here's a proposal for that. Posits that organisms are composed of networks that move energy, metabolites, and information from central reservoirs. Heart, lungs, those are the central reservoirs. Heart is a reservoir for blood, which transports the blood all over your body. Okay. What does the lungs do? It's the reservoir for oxygen. What's the reservoir for computation? Information processing? Your brain, okay? And so on, okay? To localize points for use, a network model of organisms successfully predicts quarter power scaling laws, okay? So as soon as you become a large animal, what do you have to have? You have to have a network, a central processing unit. Amazon has to have what are those? I'm sorry?
Delivery drivers?
No,
Warehouses?
warehouses, thank you. As soon as you become a big place, you gotta have warehouses and then trucks to transport stuff. And the last step is diffusion. You gotta walk across. Okay? All right, guys, so that finishes this chapter. Okay. So what I'm going to do is